Hello. Today we're going to talk about EF Core. So what is EF Core? EF Core is Entity Framework Core, and it is a library that is developed by Microsoft, and it is typically used in conjunction with the ASP.NET Core applications. And why do we need it? It gives you the ORM features. ORM stands for Object Relational Mapper, and that helps you connect to the underlying database provider. As of right now, there are so many different database providers that EF Core supports, including Oracle, DB Access, SQL Server, MySQL, PostgreSQL, SQLite. So there are a variety. There's actually an official Microsoft website that lists all the different database providers that EF Core supports. Feel free to check it out. So in this tutorial, what I want to show you is the basic setup for using EF Core, and there will be a more advanced setup later that discusses how to tweak the DB context, which is a specific class offered by EF Core, and how to customize and configure EF Core to your application's needs. I'm going to discuss all of that, but for now, let's just take care of the basic stuff. How can you perform CRUD, meaning create, read, update, and delete operations using EF Core as an object relational mapper with SQL, Azure SQL, or regular on-prem SQL Server as the underlying database provider. So the very first step you got to do is, what I have here is Visual Studio, and I already have this basic .NET Core app. As you can double click this, you'll see that I'm using .NET Framework 3.1. And the first thing that I've done is I've installed the packages that are specific to EF Core. So I have EF Core and SQL Server, that's the underlying database provider. If you were to use something else like SQLite, then you have to install EF Core, that database provider specific package as well. Now I have a tools package to support with .NET CLI cross-platform tools, and I also have the design package that supports with the migrations. And we're going to talk about migrations and what they do and how you can deploy your schema onto the real database server. So I have this basic setup here. I have to install the packages. The next step to do is go ahead and create your entity classes. Remember, this is a code first model, meaning that your code, your classes are going to define the schema. Schema indicates the structure, right? So the column structure, and the constraints and the limitations and the configuration, all of that is part of the schema. So your classes are defining the schema. So what I did is I created a folder called entity classes, and I went ahead and created two different classes. First one is called recipe. So here I have a recipe ID. And so any app properties that you think are specific to the recipe, like I have a name and the method to cook, time to cook. If it's deleted, soft deleted, is vegetarian, recipe, vegan, and the ingredients. Right, and this will be the primary key. If you use the same name as the class name, and if you suffix that with an ID, that is considered as a primary key. And this is by convention, right? You don't have to follow this format, but if you want to keep the changes or the configuration as minimal as possible, then my advice is to just follow the conventions. It works for simple apps. If you have more moderately complex apps or highly complex apps, then obviously you can tweak this to however you want, but we're not getting into this in this. So we have that, and so likewise, I also created another one, which is an ingredient. This is the one that is being referenced in the other entity class here. A single recipe can have multiple ingredients, so I have an I collection down here. And an ingredient, this class itself is specific to a particular recipe because the quantity and the units are also mentioned. So this will lock it down to a single recipe. So this is a, so it has a recipe ID, which is the property that links this to the recipe. Okay, so once you have the entity classes defined, the next step is to create a context class. So you can give whatever name you want. The convention is to suffix that with the context because this is deriving from the base class DB context, and DB context is coming in from the Entity Framework core itself. And so this is one of the packages, if you remember. Um, so you have to use that in the using statement, and so you inherit from that. Now in the constructor, there's not much here. You just need to just use the DB context options, and you pass it to the base class here, right? Now again, keep in mind that I'm not defining the connection string or anything like that. I'm just keeping it as simple as possible to get it working, right? So here you have to reference what are the different DB sets that your context object needs to keep track of. In this case, we have only two. So in reality, this will map to tables. So we call one of the tables will be called recipes, the other table will be called ingredients. So when this gets translated into SQL Server, once we're done with migrations, you will have two tables created, one for recipes and one for ingredients. Now this one, you don't have to have this, only if there is any configuration that you want to use. In this case, I'm using Fluent API to basically say, hey, although I call the property as units, in the database, I want you to call it as just unit. So it's a singular, and this is plural. So this is an example showing that you can give database specific instructions using this hook on model creating, right? So you don't have, like I said, you don't have to use this if you're happy with the way you named everything and the size constraints and everything, so you can roll with this. But you do have an option to perform any configuration using the Fluent API. So this is called Fluent API because you see the dot syntax, dot entity, dot property, it has column name, everything is chaining onto the previous one. So this is called a Fluent API, right? So once you have this set up, now you have your context going. Now next step is to specify the database itself, right? So for that, you have to register the database provider with the .NET Core app. So what I would do is go into the startup class here, and then I would register. This is how I register to the .NET dependency injection. So this services is iService collection is the .NET DI container, and to that container I am registering the DB context that we just talked about, right? And I'm also registering the underlying database provider here. It's called Use SQL Server. So if you are using SQLite, then this would be different. In that case, it would be Use SQLite. So, and then the connection is also coming in from this variable here, which is the recipe connection. So if I were to go into the app settings, I will find my connection string right here. So this is obviously using a local DB, so I'm not going across the network, and it's going to deploy my tables onto that server, my local server. So once you register this to the .NET DI, the next step is to create the migrations. So to create a migrations, we need the tools package, and you can use the PMC, which is Package Manager Console, or you can use a command prompt as well. We're going to do that in the next section.